Hello, welcome to our next episode of Uncommon Ground.
Hey guys.
We have a sign now, thanks to our lovely chalk artist Shanti Markham, who contributed that. So we are
Definitely.
very thankful for that. I am Sam McGregor. I am a pastor at Allison Creek Presbyterian Church in York County, South Carolina. And so I play the role as the institutional pastor in our conversation about topics which will include biblical stories and also some pop culture kinds of things. And so that's my perspective in our conversation that we will have today.
And I'm Mike Wright, and I am the skeptic, the non-believer, and I guess I will be challenging everyone's beliefs in all this. But I mean, it's something that I will be as educational about this as possible. So,
And I'm Janine, and I'm basically coming from a point of view of not being held and put into a box. I like kind of having conversation. I am a believer, but I'm not as far as going into religion and doing that. But I do have an open eye an open mind, I should say, for both sides. So sometimes it may seem like I'm a believer. Sometimes it may not, may not. But it's just because I like to question things, and that's kind of how I get to my decision. So.
Okay, well, good. Well, today we're going to explore a biblical story, and that is the story of the Exodus, which is in the first 5 books of the Bible is where that story is focused on. But as far as the content of the story, it comes out of Genesis and Exodus, which are the first couple of books in the Bible. And so I'll begin the story with Joseph, who is the son of Jacob. He's one of 12, and he has conflict with his brothers, and so they are jealous of him, and so they scheme how to get rid of him. They actually want to kill him at first, and then they decide, well, let's just sell him off into slavery. And so Joseph gets sold off into slavery, and through a set of circumstances, he ends up in Egypt, where he ends up in jail in Egypt, and then he encounters a couple of folks while he's in prison that tell him they have dreams, and they tell Joseph about their dreams, and Joseph is able to interpret their dreams. And one of the interpretations is that one of them is going to get killed, which does happen, but the other one ends up going to work for Pharaoh, who's obviously the king of Egypt. And so Joseph, so the prisoner ends up working for Pharaoh. Pharaoh shares that he's had a dream and doesn't know what it means. And so this cupbearer says to Pharaoh, well, I know somebody that can interpret your dreams for you. And so Joseph gets called in, and he accurately interprets the dream, which is 7 years of prosperity for Egypt, and then 7 years of famine. And so Pharaoh listens and thinks that is something he wants to go with. And so there is 7 years of prosperity, and so Pharaoh has a very high tax system for the people, and collecting grain through those 7 years of prosperity, and then they hit 7 years of famine, of drought, and because they've stored up so much grain, people from all over the region end up coming to Pharaoh to buy grain, and so Pharaoh gets very rich off of this, off of having all much grain. And so then Joseph's family, who had sold him off into slavery previously, they end up coming to Pharaoh to buy grain because they are starving in Israel, and they come Joseph ends up getting put in charge of Pharaoh's grain distribution. And so when his brothers and his father come, they don't recognize him at first, but because he's going by an Egyptian name, his appearance has changed. But then they end up recognizing him, and there's this point of reconciliation. And so the family of Joseph they move to Egypt, and Pharaoh gives them everything that they need to be successful. And so then for the next 400 years or so, they live in Egypt, and they are very prosperous and multiply. And sometimes they're called Israelites, sometimes they're called Hebrews in the Bible. And so about 400 years later, the Pharaoh that comes into power sees the Hebrews as the immigrants that become easy to target. And so Pharaoh, they say things about the Hebrews or the problems in the country, and so the Hebrews or the Israelites end up being enslaved. And so then eventually they cry out to God, and then Moses is called by God to come and lead the people out of slavery, where Pharaoh resists. There's 10 plagues, including the death of the first child and of the Egyptians. And so there's all this death and destruction. And then so the Israelites eventually leave, and then Pharaoh, his heart is changed, and he sends the Egyptian army to pursue the Israelites. And so they end up encountering them at the Sea of Reeds, or the Red Sea, and God makes a path through the sea, and so they are able to make it through. But then the Egyptians enter into the sea, and they get swamped up in the waters, and so then the Israelites, or the Hebrews, begin this 40-year journey through the desert, where they complain, and they don't have enough food, they don't have enough water. And so it's this journey of testing between them and God and Moses, and a lot of complaining about the leadership of Moses and his brother Aaron. And so that's kind of where I'll leave it right now. One of the very confusing parts of the story to me, is that God, the text says that God is the one who hardens Pharaoh's heart, and Pharaoh is kind of seen as not having a whole lot of choice in the decisions that he's making, because the text says God hardens his heart so that he is resistant to the Israelites leaving. And then after they leave, God continues to harden his heart so that he sends the army to pursue them. So that's the challenging part of that story. So that's kind of setting up the story. So how do y'all want to think of that?
Mike.
So you definitely did like a Cliff Notes version of it. I mean, I read Exodus the other day when you said we were going to be talking about this. So I was reading it, and luckily I got to about where you stopped. So, like some of my things that are just kind of like I question it. Is one of the things that I was trying to go in my head is like the timelines of all this stuff, and looking at other things, and it seems like I don't know how people assumed like the ages of everything like that, because like you did say when the next Pharaoh comes into power, but I didn't read anything about that the Pharaoh changed hands, like to be a new Pharaoh or anything like that. So it was always listed as Pharaoh.
Right, it's always listed as Pharaoh, but
there's no name.
There's no names given.
Yeah.
Right.
So when Moses was found in the reeds and all that stuff, and he's living in the Pharaoh's family pretty much, that like he grew up, and by the time, again, unfortunately Exodus does not give a lot of information. You have to read into Acts and a whole bunch of others to get more information about Exodus, which I think is one of those books when you'd read and it says for more, if you want to go on this adventure,
for further information,
go to chapter 6 on page 3, and then you can continue. And like I I felt like there was lots of stuff left out, and I kind of like, I'll get to probably that later, but it's like a fill in the blank kind of thing where people just don't know what they're actually reading. But come to find out, like, I'm assuming that Moses was around 40 years old when he did kill that Egyptian. Do you?
That I'm gonna I don't know that, but I'm going to assume your research that could be accurate. So to what you're referencing is prior to Moses being called to lead the people, Moses sees a couple of Egyptians fighting with each other, and he ends up killing one of them.
Right.
And actually ends up fleeing. He becomes a fugitive because Pharaoh's after him because of killing the Egyptian.
Right. So with that said, in Acts it says 40 years later, when he speaks to when he speaks to God as the burning bush.
Okay.
Which at that point I feel like he's been out there. I feel like he's hallucinating. I feel like a lot of that stuff. I know when you see fire, you will see like I don't know what the term is, but when you see like the mirage in flames and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So I think that's probably what he was seeing. But so he was 80 when he saw the bush. So a 40-year time difference has come to pass. And then he also speaks to Pharaoh when he's around 80.
Okay.
So it's in about the same year. But as far as like the Pharaoh is concerned, like I don't know how old the Pharaoh is, and you don't know like what kind of changes. But if he's lived in the family for at least 40 years before he left, you would think that he would be trying to change the things internally rather than externally. And you know,
what do you mean?
Like he's in the family, he's being taken care of by the Pharaoh's daughter,
right?
And so technically he's being raised by the Pharaoh's family.
Because to go back, Moses was born, he was one of the Hebrew children, and so his mom hides him because Pharaoh's trying to kill him, and so he ends up getting adopted by Pharaoh's family. He ends up being raised in Pharaoh's estate, basically, and so to me, Moses always kind of symbolizes this never quite sure which world he lives in.
Right.
Is he Hebrew? Is he Egyptian? I mean, he was raised Egyptian, basically.
Right. But what I mean is like he learns about God by the teachings of the maidens and all this other stuff, at least from what I was reading. And so he understands like the Hebrew side of things, even though it's not how he was raised. And you think that if he has this vision of trying to make sure everything is copacetic amongst everyone, that he would be trying to change the power be to, make things better for everyone. Because for that 40 years, it was still the same slavery, the same punishment, the same all that kind of stuff for 40 years. And then for that 40 years after, until he speaks to the Pharaoh, whether it be a different Pharaoh or not, that's still another 40 years of the slavery, of the punishment.
So you're saying him talking didn't really change anything?
Like, why didn't he try to change all the stuff inside and talk to people and be like, maybe we should do this differently, instead of just letting these things go? And then all of a sudden rebelling against something that he could have changed before any of this happened. And it's like, I don't feel like if he was like chosen by God to lead these people and stuff, he should have been chosen from God to change it before he had to lead these people out.
Change the system?
Yeah.
I think those are fair questions,
So it's just, I don't know, it's just one of those things that's kind of like, I think it's troublesome as far as like the calendar. I don't even know if it's the same calendar year, because there was Moses lived to about 120,
yeah.
So, and then there's speak of even people who lived to 600, 700,
so
900
were their
years
days
old.
a lot shorter than ours? Like did they kind of?
Well, I think it's important that we get so wrapped up in
Today.
our culture today of numbers and historical accuracy, where in the biblical stories that's not of concern to them.
Right.
Because they're dating things by who's in power.
Right.
In the 5th year of king whatever, and so that's not an issue.
Well, I think for me, it comes an issue as since there's been so many variations of the Bible and things have been changed so people can read it easier and things like that and get people's different interpretations, you think that someone would come up with a system to be like, well, even though it was 800 years old, he was 800 years old, in today's equivalent, it would be like
dog years?
Yeah, like dog years kind of thing. Like,
why don't you come up with that, Mike?
Because I think that's where because when you want like facts and something to have people trust in something, believe in something, you don't want it to seem just like a fairy tale of all this, just like, oh, they've been alive for 800 years. Because in today's society, that you can't fathom that.
But even in facts today, there are still going to be holes where things can't really be explained, or there's not actual tangible evidence. So
right. But when you do this, that's kind of hard to believe sometimes, and this is hard to believe sometimes, and this is hard to believe sometimes. When you get it all together, it's just too much to take in.
So your problem is that it doesn't flow like we're thinking in our time. Like the timeline doesn't flow that way.
Right.
But let's say it was that their days were shorter. So that,
not to change much,
does
but
that
like
change the base of the story?
It seems that in the Bible, and I'm gonna just go off on a little tangent for a second, but it seems in the Bible after the flood, people's ages seem to be more realistic.
That's correct.
In today's
that
thing.
Is correct.
So why is it that before the flood, it seems that people have this almost like superhuman ability to stay alive?
Well, again,
I know it has not much to do with Exodus, but I'm getting this from the stories and just it's something that I think about. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Pre-flood kinds of documentation or historical accuracy it's not an issue. It's not something that the Bible is concerned about. And so if you're looking for proof by saying, well, this obviously doesn't make sense, so then I'm going to disregard it. I would challenge you not to get so wrapped up in those numbers.
Okay.
And that's what I was saying. Like the numbers, does it change the basis of what the story was and what the message was? Because that's where I'm more interested. I'm more like, what is the purpose? Like, what is the purpose of Exodus? What's the message we're supposed to be learning, and not really getting to all the nitty gritty of every single detail.
Well, and because I think that's where that's where a lot of times where what folks get confused about what the Bible is.
Mm-hmm.
The Bible is not written to be a historical document.
Right.
It is written as different people's experience, sharing their testimony of their experiences with God.
Right.
And so I don't go to the Bible for historic accuracy, because the biblical writers aren't caring about that like we do in our Western culture. So
the point I was going to get to this, or get to the thing about the age and stuff, and you brought up about historical documents. We have historical documents of, thousands and thousands of years ago from like Egypt and Rome and all these other places during similar times. And we have like good historical, as much as we can, information about that. And why don't we have information from that time that people lived that long, or people had these kind of like situations that occurred?
You talking about the pre-flood kind of years of people living that long?
Like, it's one of those things where it almost like makes it seem like someone was just coming up with a story just to give a story, where we don't have other historical information that could back it up. And I know what you're saying, they're just sharing their
So
things
I mean,
with it, but
again, if you're looking to, if your goal is to disprove it, and you say, well, we have no proof that someone lived 1,000 years or 800 years or whatever, you're going to be successful in that. I mean, you are.
Because we can't today in our mind comprehend that someone's living that long. That's because you're always going to have that issue with most people are going to be like, yeah, no one can live that long because the average age is this. So people are not going to be able to believe that someone lived, or someone was, doing a lot of things at the age of 120 or 80 years old. Because you're thinking about an 80-year-old today. you're not thinking about what conditions were like before, or
Okay.
it's just not gonna. Yeah.
So that's enough of my age. I have something that actually references with more of God stuff. That's more of just historical documentation and things like that just kind of goes in my head. But so as far as God coming to Moses and Aaron, there's a weird thing. Well, there's two weird things that I kind of like got from it. One is that he says that he is the Lord a lot. Mm-hmm. And it almost seems a little conceited that he has to tell everyone that he is the Lord and that there's no other gods and everything like that. Mm-hmm. And I know that Egyptians believed in many different gods and so forth. But the thing that's interesting is that when he gave them, when they asked for proof that he was God, that they told him to throw their staff down and it would turn into a serpent. Mm-hmm. So when they went back to the Pharaoh and did all that stuff, he had his Egyptian magicians do the same thing as well. And they were able to perform very similar castings or whatever they want to call it, that they were providing, that God was giving Aaron the power to do those kind of things, or I guess Moses and Aaron the power to do those things, because they also did like the fish, like, doing the destroy the fish in the river, or the lakes or whatever was around them, things like that. And then they would also do it. And I know that there would speak that they could not equivalent to God's power. But doesn't that make you wonder that there was something else that gave the magicians their power? Why did they have this supernatural power to also do the same things that God had given Moses and Aaron to do? And was there another God that had given them their power, or was this power always given? And that means if they all have this supernatural power, what makes God more powerful than them?
So, one of the ways to kind of understand what was going on in the culture, and I think we see it in other places too. It is like it's a competition,
right? And
so when you reference the Lord, the Hebrew word is Yahweh, mm-hmm. And which when Moses is called out at the burning bush and he says, what name do I tell people is doing this, and the name is Yahweh, which means I am who I am, or I will be who I will be. It's a very confusing kind of word. And in fact, when the Jewish people, they would not speak the word. Actually, in Jewish people today, still, in a lot of Jewish parts of the religion, will not speak the word of Yahweh. But it is like that there was this competition going on, and Yahweh had to prove, I am the God of all these gods you can choose to follow. I am the one that you should seek to follow. And so, you're talking about those kinds of competitions, like with, turning staffs into snakes and those kinds of things. Those are the kinds of competitions that I think it's very easy for magicians and, to kind of be on the same playing field. But where Yahweh steps above that and shows a greater ability than anything else out there is, I think, in looking at this journey through the Exodus, hey, I am one that can get you out of slavery and guide you to a new land. And it's also a sense that Yahweh is a God of tremendous grace and love and justice, and that is not the same as what you're getting from these competing gods in the culture.
So when you say they're gods, are we like they actual gods? Because
I guess, does that mean that there's actual proof somewhere in the Bible that there's many gods, and you're only one of? Because other Christians will definitely tell me there's only one God. Yeah. There's only one true God, mm-hmm. and that is God.
They're-
But when you
all it
say
is.
one true God, does that mean that they're
Well,
like false gods?
That means that,
'Cause if
that
you go
people
by
believe
that
in like a
statement-
false prophet that's not a god at all. They just say they're a god, but they're
But
not.
they don't have like the power or the ability like God. Is that
Right,
what
but
you're-
these magicians in Exodus, they had similar power. They could
But
actually.
what are magicians usually? They're
Well, they
tricking
called them
you know?
magicians, but they
Yeah.
also called them a sorcerer. Also in Exodus, they called them
Mhm.
sorcerers and magicians. So
Well, would you agree with the fact that today in our culture we have many gods?
I believe that people believe in different gods. That doesn't mean that I feel that there are many gods. I feel that people have beliefs
So
in different religions.
what's going to be what would be basing the definition of God
Right.
on?
So
That's
to
what-
me,
yeah.
you know, the gods that are out there that are competing
Mhm.
against the Yahweh God is the God of materialism.
Mhm.
The God of
I mean, there's a lot of false gods. You have
I mean,
like
there's
celebrities.
there's
you
all
have
sorts
people
of
that,
false
yeah.
gods, and so, you know, where do those come from? That's a big question that doesn't have an answer to. But I think that what we can affirm is that we are all being challenged by forces that are trying to pull us in different directions. Where those come from, that's a question I don't have an answer to. But I affirm that those forces are there, and they are trying to pull us into dark places and places that are not good for us. And so when I am choosing to follow Yahweh God, I am choosing to follow the God of creation, the God who leads me to a better place of who I'm created to be.
Okay.
So just to bring it back, the story of Exodus, what would you say the message? What would be the purpose, the message? That's kind of where I kind of want to understand. Like all the stories and all that. What's the lesson you're supposed to learn, you know, from it?
You want to offer what do you think, Janine?
I feel like it was kind of everywhere. I felt like, and you even said that there were, like you were saying about the, you know, all this stuff was happening, but there was no kind of way of trying to stop it. So I don't really understand what the message in that is. And also you were saying that God was kind of wasn't really letting people make their own decisions. So are you really learning anything if you're not really in control of the decision that you're making? Someone's making the decision for you. That's kind of,
You no longer have free will.
Yeah, that's kind of, and that's kind of how I took it.
Well, I mean, that's a challenging part of that text that I don't understand.
Yeah.
You know, because I think, you know, the biblical story has, I mean, I think human free will is very much a part of it. But what the text says is that God hardened Pharaoh's heart, and I can't explain that away. I just have to leave that there, and then we have to deal with that. I don't have a good answer for that, except to say.
How does it speak to you, though?
Well,
yeah.
to me, it's whatever made Pharaoh to be resistant to allowing the freedom of the Israelites to happen. I mean, that's a human thing that none of us wants to. If we're in power and control, we don't want to give that up. And particularly if we have achieved that in unhealthy or destructive ways, we don't want to give that up. I mean, that's what dictators do. No one gives up their power and control. And so, you know, the way I guess I do kind of explain it to myself is that the biblical writers, you know, feel like God is in control of everything, which God is. But, you know, and ultimately, you know, God is moving the world in a certain direction. But within that, we do have human will about whether we're going to choose to be a part of that path or whether we're going to fight against that path. So, you know, so I think your original question was what is the the Exodus story, what does it mean to me? So I think that's a good
That's
question for
everyone.
everybody
Yeah.
to kind of leave with and to say,
definitely.
this story of liberation, what does that mean to you? How does that speak to you individually? How does that speak to you in your family? And how do you think that speaks to our nation and all nations of a God who carries out this liberation for this oppressed group of people?
Definitely. I think that's a good point.
Yeah. I think so.
Okay.
All right.
So
well,
we just got to figure out what we're going to talk about next. Do you know what you want to talk about? You want to continue Exodus, or do you want to?
You want to just continue Exodus?
We can.
We can.
Okay.
Yep.
Let's do
I
it.
have more stuff to talk about.
Okay. Well,
It may come back to some of the parts of this part of Exodus, but I have more stuff to talk about.
But no more about the age stuff.
I just had to bring it up because I had to bring it up. It bothered me. So.
It's dog ears.
yeah. Okay.
But yeah.
Okay.
But anyways,
I'll do a little more research on that, and then when we come back,
So what do you guys think about the Exodus story so far? If you've read it, definitely read it if you haven't read it, so you can get a little more information. And again, I have read it, so I know the type of battle that I'm going to be in.
With me?
Yeah.
Oh man, hey, we're not supposed to be battling, Mike. We're supposed to be understanding.
But no, I definitely.
Janine is our little moderator.
Yes,
right.
yes. I'm like, okay, let me bring back
our peaceful,
So I mean, it's definitely something that I think people, if they want to learn more and actually have a good conversation with other people about those situations, even if you believe or not believe, I think you need to have the right kind of knowledge on the subject before you try to state your case.
Very, very good.
But yeah, guys. So
we'll definitely see you guys in the next one.
Yep.
And we appreciate, you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe and also watch Pastor Sam's sermons as well. That's, on the channel as well. And, that can kind of give you a little insight to what we may be talking about here on the podcast. So,
all right.
Yep.
Thanks a lot.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Mike. Thanks, Janine.
All right.
All right. Bye-bye.
Have
Bye,
a great
guys.
one.
See you
Have a
later.
great one. Bye-bye.